G'day fans and welcome to another exciting episode of Sci-Fi Zone. It is a beautifully warm night outside. Why are people sitting inside watching us? I will never know. Tonight I've got Alison with me again. How are you, Miss Alison?
I'm very well, thank you, Dags.
Mate, we are here talking about some sci-fi stuff. So already we've got people joining us, which is absolutely outstanding. Good old Christy's with us and Mr. Ange and Gavin all the way from Sydney. It's good to see everybody back and having a really, really good time. So, Alison, what have you been doing sci-fi-wise in your life? Anything particularly that's been grabbing you, as it were?
Well, recently the fam and I started watching season 4 of The Good Place. I think that counts as sci-fi without giving away any spoilers. The premise is that the Michael, the character played by Ted Danson, is the architect of the afterlife, and the other characters that you see there pictured have all died and gone to the good place. So they don't call it heaven, they call it the good place. And then try and figure out why they are there. They don't think they should be there, and there's lots of twists and turns. It keeps you on your toes. It's a lot of unexpected plot twists, a lot of very witty humor and philosophical commentary. So and a lot of fun. So there's a lot of really good sci-fi out there, but I know a lot of it can tend on the darker side of things. So if you just want to relax and have a really good laugh, The Good Place is really awesome.
Well, I'll tell you what is the good place at the moment, and that is hanging out here with us. And I like what James has said. It's actually too warm outside for him. So, yes, you'll find that as the hot weather kicks in, the fans and the nerds sort of got to gather indoors, don't they? Draw the blinds, put the DVDs on and all the rest of it. And they say, put the AC on and we'll just sort of stick it out for the duration of the summer. So, yeah, very, very cool. Now, I'm also aware that you've been watching this bit of Docky Who.
Yeah, so I'm missing the latest episode right now, Dags. I hope you appreciate this. It's on TV right now. So yes, been catching up with Flux, which is a 6-part, whatever you call it, story arc, miniseries, whatever. Obviously, Doctor Who, like so many other shows, got rudely interrupted by COVID-19. So this is Jodie Whittaker's finale, as it were, but it's a 6-part extravaganza.
Very good. There's been a lot of mixed responses to the 13th Doctor's stories. They've said that her characterization is good, but the writing hasn't been as flash as it has been in previous decades, as it were. Do you agree with that or not?
Overall, yes. I mean, throughout the 3 years that she's been the Doctor, obviously there have been better stories and not quite so good stories. So there have been some brilliant ones in there. It would be good to see them get some new blood on board. I believe they're getting Chris Chibnall back and a couple of others that have sort of been and done the rounds before. And, you know, if you weren't a fan of their writing back in David Tennant's day, you're like, oh, now do we really have to go back to that writer? Flux in particular, they seem to be trying to cram a lot of stuff in, like all of the monsters, all of the dialogue, everything. And yeah, some of the, I think back to the Tom Baker era, I think, you know, some of those stories by today's standards might be considered really, really slow, but they were more focused, single mystery stories, if you like what's the problem that has to be solved here. And it didn't necessarily mean, oh, it's saving the entire world from the Cybermen. It could be a smaller and simpler story that often worked better than these bigger, you know, let's pack more in, let's add more in.
Very, very good. Yeah, it's funny because it's caused a bit of a kerfuffle with the fan community regarding how her stories have been and whether she's been a good doctor or a bad doctor and whether the writing has supported her characterization or not. And I guess maybe 10 years from now, people will look back upon this particular era and go, you know what, that 13th Doctor wasn't that bad after all. So, but I know it's caused a bit of a kerfuffle amongst fans, as I said. But anyway, we shall see how it's going. But the most important thing is you've been watching the show, and that's what it's all about. And I like the fact that you're actually prepared to sacrifice watching the show tonight to be on this show. How good is that? Absolutely love it. So there you go. And actually, James has said he's got to go and watch the Doctor Who 6 show finale. Writing still shit by some standards. Well, there you go. So, as we said, it's it kind of divided the fan base a little bit, which are very, very, very cool. So you've obviously had a very busy week, which is particularly groovy. For myself, I've only got 2 things. I'll go through them relatively quickly. These aren't 100% sci-fi related, but they're sort of a bit out there. So I finally got around to watching Free Guy. It was actually available on Disney Plus, I think it was. Have you seen this at all?
No, I haven't. I've heard
It's
different things.
Look, it was good. It was enjoyable. I had no real problems with it. I mean, for those out there, you could almost argue it's another version of the Truman Show. Had a very, very strong links to They Live. With the sunglasses, you put sunglasses on and you see things completely differently. It's a huge visual effects overload, right? So it's a kind of movie that they could never have done 20 years ago because it's just like there's just CG shit everywhere. It's just like all the stuff going on. But if anything, it's a very interesting sort of look at how the gaming industry works, especially, like computer gaming, how like because there's such a large market of people who are really devoted to this stuff. How do the people who run the corporations, how do they treat the end users? Do they treat them with respect, or they just see them as money-making machines? And that's effectively what the show's all about, or one aspect of it anyway. So, and because you don't realize that those people who are pouring the tens of billions of dollars into buying PlayStations and Xboxes and getting onto the online reality games and whatever else, it all is just churning out money for the people who are controlling these industries. So, Andrew said Free Guy was very good, and it was. Yeah, there's no denying that whatsoever. And Christy said she actually enjoyed it more so than the Truman Show. It's like, okay, I mean, they are slightly different elements of the same thing, but I found it kind of worked. So I thought that was rather interesting and enjoyable. And the other thing that I've been watching recently, I just saw it the other day because everybody had been talking about it, was, of course, good old Squid Game. Now, have you seen this one at all?
Well, only little bits and pieces, and again, I've heard differing things, and especially about the level of violence. So, yeah, I'm still thinking about that one.
So Squid Game is almost like a variation of Battle Royale. For those who remember a long time ago, probably don't because it was a Japanese movie. The key thing of, I guess, Squid Game, it's made in Korea, South Korea, so it's not Hollywood by any stretch. And so it's a little bit left field for that. The violence is almost cartoonish to a degree because when there's all this blood, it's always bright red, right? And it's just like a dude gets shot. It's like it's the tomato sauce pouring out everywhere. So I guess if it was 2 decades ago, people would be mortified by what they're seeing. But now we're so desensitized to it, it doesn't impact as badly. And it's quick. So someone gets shot, they effectively die. There's not like there's body parts being ripped off and all sort of business. I found it really interesting. And, of course, for those who aren't aware, the hardest part to get used to is the fact that it's dubbed in English. So, and you can put on the original Korean subtitles. And apparently the Korean subtitles, it's worth reading those because you get a better characterization to how the people are speaking. Because when you have the English dub, one, it sounds weird, right? Because you've got clearly Korean actors who speak like Americans, but they've had to sort of shorten the dialogue so it'll actually match with the lip sync. So you can't have the old thing of the lip has stopped moving, but the voice keeps going, right? They've had to try and match it up. So they've had to change some of the lines around. So if you can get your head past all that, and it does take a little bit of getting used to, I actually found it quite interesting. And of course, that's dealing with capitalist society, the idea that, you need money to survive and to be somebody. And what happens when you run out of money? What do you do? And how desperate will you become? Or what lengths will you go to try and get money? Now, of course, in modern day society, gambling is one of the key ones, whether it be horse racing or Tatslotto or whatever else. But in this society, when they're like when you've got no options left, what do you do? And of course, that's where Squid Game comes into it. So I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was really, really quite good. So it's definitely worth checking out for people out there. So there you go.
Sounds a little bit like The Running Man, but good old 80s masterpiece.
Yeah, yes, except there's no crowd as such. The key thing with this is that you never know who the bad guys really, really are. I mean, who the soldiers are. It's done very, very well, unlike Battle Royale, and it's mentioned here by William that Battle Royale was 21 years ago, an absolute classic. And for those who never saw Battle Royale, it's a dystopian future. They get school kids. It's a bit like Hunger Games to go and fight to the death. But what worked for Battle Royale is they use real life school kids, right? And that was really quite interesting. But you knew who the bad guys were because none of them were wearing masks. Where in Squid Game, everybody's wearing a mask. So it's really is that faceless identity. And yeah, from that regard, I actually think it worked quite well. But yeah, if you can get your head past the English dub, then you probably will actually enjoy it, which is kind of groovy. So what do you reckon there, Miss Allison? All very, very good and exciting. Yay, team! What do you reckon?
All good and exciting. Yeah, I have heard that from some people that Squid Game is more violence and less story, and I tend to like things that have a decent story. It's not the violence that bothers me, but it's like I'm going to get really bored really quickly if there isn't a decent story.
Yeah,
but I haven't seen it, so
yeah, because it goes for like not 9 hours because it's 9 episodes. You do get a fair bit of character build up, and maybe the Korean subtitle version would give you far more strength to the characterization. But anyway, it's become a huge, massive sensation at the moment. Everybody's talking about it, and it's on Netflix. And I thought, I'll give it a whirl. And yeah, I was suitably impressed. So as William said, and I think William's referring to Battle Royale as opposed to Squid Game. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, they are sort of on a similar vein. But yeah, you look at how, say, Battle Royale, which is Japanese, Hunger Games, which is American, and you've got Squid Game, which is Korean. They're all vastly different entities, even though the principle behind the three of them is pretty much the same. Good stuff. All right, so that actually brings us to our topic of conversation for this evening. And this is actually a bit of a significant one because it actually impacts everybody in one way or another, and for you, Alison, in particular, because we're talking about the future of fandom. And it's kind of interesting because for those who don't know, science fiction fandom started in the late 1920s. Okay, once I think it was Amazing Stories, a magazine was being produced. People started writing into Amazing Stories, putting their names and addresses on the letters of comment. Other people would see those letters and go, "Hey, that's just down the road from me." Write to those people, and before you knew it, communities started to get formed. Once communities started to form, then fan clubs started to get created. Admittedly, back then they weren't media ones; they were primarily just literature ones. And in the end, from there, a community was evolved. And up until the end of the 20th century, it pretty much was the same the whole way through. You join a fan club because you're a fan of something. This is the media side. You get their newsletter, you get all the information, the latest hot goss that's going on. There are fan club meetings. You go to those, you meet up with other people, talk about what's been happening in the world. And the world was good. Now, as it turns out, and I know people watching the show won't know this, you're actually the president of the Melbourne Science Fiction Club, the second oldest fan club or sci-fi fan club in the world. And so before I delve too deeply into it, your background being in the fandom community, how long have you been around for and where did it all start?
Since the early 90s. So pretty much once I got to university. Always been a science fiction fan, but then I got to university and there used to be a lot of clubs and societies when the union at the universities was structured a bit differently. So I know Melbourne University, which is where I went, had quite a few clubs, as did Monash University. And in fact, we had a couple of events that we ran in conjunction with Monash University. And I think because the funding and the unions were structured a bit differently, there was more flexibility to do things like that. And as the unis have become more privatised, a lot of that has fallen away. I know a few of the clubs that I used to belong to don't exist anymore because you've got to show that you're making a profit or whatever. You can't just get together and hang out and watch Red Dwarf, which is what we used to do. Or buy Terry Pratchett books again, which is something that we used to do. So although a lot of their sporting clubs are still going strong, the fan clubs, not so much. And for me, that was a little bit of a feeder from the university clubs to the other clubs. So Alan Stewart, who many people that are watching this evening may know, but Alan Stewart's also been around in Melbourne fandom, Australian fandom for a very long time and has attended a few of the conventions overseas as well. And he came along to one of our meetings at the uni one day and said, "Hey, did you know that there's this other club? And hey, did you know that there's this convention?" So that was right before Constantinople, which was a combined media and literature convention held in Melbourne in the early 90s.
94.
And yeah, 94. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll go along and check out this Melbourne Sci-Fi Club thing, and turned up and they were packing com bags for the convention. And I just joined in packing com bags and they said, "Oh, we'll keep her." And yeah, just found a whole bunch of people that I got along with. It was like I found my tribe and said, oh, yeah, I'm just going to keep coming along and hanging out with you guys. And they pretty much haven't got rid of me since. So that's, what's that, 27 years or something ridiculous?
Very, very cool. Now, you got a question for you, actually. Gavin's asked about what was the biggest fandom at the start for you. So you may have actually covered this, but I'm not sure.
Look, once I joined the MSFC, I actually started going along to a lot of the other fan clubs as well. And back then, they were all really coordinated and organised. I found this in Melbourne, and I found it, I later moved to Brisbane, and I found that in Brisbane as well. So you get Star Walking would meet one weekend, Oztrek would meet the next weekend, the Babylon 5 Club would meet the next weekend, and there was something to go to every weekend. And it wasn't all the same people at all the same meetings. Obviously, there was different fans, people who liked Star Wars and didn't like Star Trek and so on and so forth. But there were a lot of people who just liked everything. Oh, and Doctor Who Club is in there as well. So it was just going along to all these different clubs every weekend. I suppose some people like to go and play basketball or go out to nightclubs with their friends every weekend. So this was my thing. And back then as well, it wasn't all just about watching videos, although back then going to a fan club meeting was often the only way to see the latest video. So it wasn't the internet as we know the internet today, and it would take months or years for some shows to get to Australia. And I actually have a really fond memory of turning up to someone's house to see the very first episode of Voyager, and I really hadn't watched a lot of Star Trek in my life up until that point, but it was the social aspect of it and the fact that we're all a bit like going to the movies with friends. We're all sitting in someone's lounge room. We're all going to see this thing for the first time together months before it was even going to be broadcast in Australia, because someone in the US, a fan in the US had taped it. So that's a great thing about fandom as well. You make friends all over the world. Someone over there had taped it, stuck it in the parcel post, and posted it to Australia. Someone here converted it from NTSC to PAL. Okay, it's ready, everyone. Let's all go to so-and-so's place. We'll have a barbecue for the afternoon, and then we're going to sit down and we're going to watch the new Star Trek. Really different atmosphere, really different vibe. Very different to, everybody can just jump online, watch the new episode all together online, and we'll just chat about it online. It's just so different.
Just a side, Christy has asked about the uni Quidditch clubs, whether it be sport or fandom. They would be classed as their own fandom if they still kept their connections to Harry Potter. That would be class. The fandom part would still be there. But if they just ditched it all and just played the game and not referenced Harry Potter at all, then it becomes a sporting thing. It's a bit of a grey area, I guess. But it's their own community. I mean, if they're part of a larger fantasy group, then they would be classed as fandom. But if they just stick together as themselves, I don't know, sort of one or the other, really. So not entirely sure. It's very funny you should bring up all these points because it's when I joined in the mid 80s, actually. Obviously, the world was different back then. And as I said, you joined a fan club because you get hold of a newsletter, you get all the latest, greatest information about the latest TV shows, movies, or whatever. And it was only when the meetings were on that you went along. And it was because back then, unlike today, if you were a science fiction fan, you really had no one to share it with, right? Most people out in the big wide world thought that sci-fi fans were a bunch of knobs. So if you could go to a social club meeting, meet other people and bring up all these topics that you've always wanted to discuss, and people would respond to you and listen to you and give you feedback and then provide questions of their own, you suddenly felt like you were part of a family. That's where the community thing came into it. And the fact you're able to do it face to face with everybody, you gravitated to one another. And before you knew it, you became addicted to it, effectively. You're thinking, okay, when this event finishes, I can't wait for the next one. And what you said about how Melbourne in particular had something on every single week. So for those who weren't aware of it, the MSFC, the club that you're running, met every Friday night. So that would mean out of like the 51 of the 52 weeks of the year, every weekend, or at least every Friday, you could go to a science fiction event. And even in Sydney and probably some parts of the world didn't have that. And so once you added in the Star Wars Club and the Star Trek Club and the Doctor Who Club and whatever else, suddenly you could have a massively booked social calendar. And that is where I think a lot of people really sort of gravitated to, because it was all part of the one thing. The only thing I think that was significantly important for them, especially in the 80s and rolling into the 90s, was the age of everybody. because as I think we were discussing off air, that when I joined the community, everybody was in their late teens, early 20s. But these days, as we've all gotten older, there's no younger people coming in to replace us old farts, as we did to the previous old farts. Like when I joined Austrek, even a lot of the original members would all bail out. And that's, I think, is a significant thing. So I think the fact that we're all the same age really sort of like help things work the way they did. It's like that big, huge family atmosphere. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, we were talking about this off air and discussing how do you get younger people in? I mean, I obviously count as an older person now, even though my kids come to the meetings, because if I'm going to a meeting, the kids go to the meetings. They're really the only younger people, and they're quite young. But if you're talking about people in their 20s, I'm thinking, I don't know where they socialize. Are they all hanging out online because that's the way they grew up and that's what they are familiar with? Or are they just hanging out somewhere else completely different that I'm unaware of because I'm an old nerd now? Yeah, really, really difficult. And we've done so many surveys and tried to get so much feedback. It's like, hey, what do you want to see at meetings? You know, if we know what you want, we'll do our best to provide it for you. And you get crickets. So it may very well be that our fond memories and the fandom we've known and have enjoyed is on its way out, and the new generation wants something new. Don't know. Can't answer that question.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because once we got into the 2000s, so everything up to the end of the like the 20th century was fantastic. It was awesome. You know, you could do no wrong. Once you got into the 2000s, the internet really took over, and then like the killer was like social media, right? And as we've discussed, people sort of gravitated towards that, and that's where we are today. Like, for example, James has mentioned here. Sorry, wrong one. About James has mentioned about bring back the sci-fi social life. As you said, you can dangle all the carrots, but someone has to be out there willing to grab them. And we're not talking about a local thing. This is a global issue, and it's not just impacting sci-fi clubs. It's impacting all these other community groups as well. It seems to be a common theme that's running through all of them, where people like us have grown up with it, and no one is coming behind us to replace ourselves. And as a result, the energy levels are all starting to sap out. And I've had situations like, I've been a part of Austrek now for almost 40 years. And even they've said that they'd love to do all these things, but everybody's like a lot older than we used to be. When back in the day, when you were like in your 20s, young 20s, you know, you just like think there was no like boundaries. You just went out. There was no restrictions because you're single. There was no mortgages, no families, no marriages. You're just like, you're out there to party. And once you settle down, the mindset changes completely. And I think that's one of the big issues.
Yeah.
And sorry, you go on. You go first.
Yeah, even people I know that you know, as a couple, they're both into fandom. So I was just thinking, actually, a lot of people I know, their current husbands or wives or partners, they met through fandom, and they've been together for as long as I've known them. So they've been together for 30 odd years, and they're still together. But the responsibilities of a family are quite large. And so even though they might still have a love for SF, that they don't have the time to be running meetings, or, you know, often they don't have the time to actually attend meetings. So it's that double-edged sword, if you will. I think, but so many people have made so many good friends. I made a lot of good friends through fandom. I mean, I met you, Dags, probably in the early 90s and stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
In fact, it might have been at Constantinople. I met a lot of people at Constantinople that it's like, I blame Constantinople for so much. People say, where did you meet that at Constantinople? Seems to be where I met everyone. And yeah, people have gone on, got married and had kids, and or, you know, made lifelong friendships. So you think, as a younger person, that would sound fantastic to me. I'd love to meet people that I have something in common with, and I can go out and socialize with. So I feel like, those people are missing out. But at the same time, it's the older people are getting burnout because we can't keep juggling everything that we've got on.
A couple of really good comments that have come through. William has said that in the old days, he used to have the Doctor Who Club Victoria meetings at his parents' place, probably 3 times a year on a rotational basis with other club members, right? Can you even begin to imagine anybody doing that today, putting their word out to people they don't even know, saying, hey, I'm having a gig at my joint, just turn up and it'll all be grouse? Because a lot of people aren't even aware that on fan club newsletters, and I know I was discussing this with a friend of mine recently who's also watching tonight, where people would put their their addresses and phone numbers in newsletters saying, call between these times, between 5 and 7 in the evening or whatever else, and you could actually ring a person up in their house, right? That sort of thing would never happen today. And the idea of meeting at people's places, and I know I've done this with when I was doing conventions back in the early 90s, and you're doing a fundraiser, you just put the word out, the event is here, people just turn up, you don't have no idea who they were, and they're there as part of the show. And you'd be thinking that sort of thing could never happen today. So even if somebody said today, oh look, I want to revitalize the social sci-fi scene, and I'll have barbecues at my house, but unless you say, I'm only going to invite people that I know, that's actually not exactly what it's all about, which is unfortunate, but totally understandable. There's a really good comment here from online, from Gavin. Is online socializing really socializing? No, it wouldn't be, because in my personal opinion, and then others may differ with this view, fandom is when you are physically with other people, okay? If you're looking at a screen, typing text, right, you're not a part of fandom. You might be a part of an online community, but you're not part of the sci-fi fandom community. For me, you've got to take that extra step out the front door, on the tram or the bus or the car, down to the gig, and actually hang out with other fans. And that's why I think if you're just living on a computer or on your phone for 20 years, you can't say you've been a part of fandom for 20 years. Unless there's especially if there's no excuse why you can't go down. If you live in a different country, whatever, all right, things might be different. But if there's no reason why you can't do it, that to me doesn't cut the mustard. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I agree. And it's been interesting being in lockdown so much of the last 2 years and not being able to get out. It's been great that we've had something like Zoom, or we've had platforms that, hey, we have been able to get together and socialize. I know we've played games online, because sometimes down at the MSFC we have board games. Okay, we can't get together for board games. We'll jump online and do things. And it is socializing online, but you're right, it lacks that extra step of going out and meeting people and really being a part of the community. And socializing online, to me, it's too much like I'm just watching another video online. And that's where I say I don't know whether it's because that's what the younger generation now are familiar with, amongst other things. But you're so used to, they seem to be so used to staying at home and just watching everything on a screen. It's like, no, you gotta get up, you gotta go, you gotta contribute something, you gotta be part of something. And you've just reminded me, actually, years ago, going to DudCon at Paul Ewan's place, because I think for whatever reason that kind of it wasn't running or something, and we had to have the national convention. So Paul Ewan's is like, all right, barbecue at my place. And because it was so small, it was called DudCon, because it wasn't this huge thousands and thousands of dollars in a hotel and huge extravaganza and costume parade and stuff. And it was still a lot of fun. There was lots of silly games. I remember conventions over the years, all sorts of silly games that have been played, like the Fan Olympics, and of course costume parades are always a really big thing at science fiction conventions, long before cosplay became
we tackled that on a different episode of this show.
Right.
That's right. It was a different world. This is an interesting one from Aaron. He's mentioned about social media forums allow you to complain 24/7. You don't have to wait until a once a month meeting. But the thing, and I agree with this, sure, you can voice your opinions there and then, no worries at all. But the idea of meeting other people wasn't about just complaining about who's watched what, who's done what. It's just catching up and being able to communicate with people on the same level face to face than you do on screen. So Facebook and all those other things can only go so far. And in the end, we are, as I've said once before on another show, human beings are a social animal. The idea is they're actually meant to gravitate towards each other and actually be together as a group, not look at a completely artificial environment and just saying, yep, I'm a part of this crowd and I'm not. So I think that has a lot to do with it. Because as I found out, I got a guy that I know who lives in America, in Atlanta. He's the world's biggest Batman collector. And I once said to him, now he's in Atlanta, Georgia, right? This is in a big American city. And I said, mate, what fan clubs do you go to? What meetings do you have? And he says, none. There is zero, right? He has absolutely no friends whatsoever physically that he can go and see who share the same interest as him. And he even said one time he tried to put on an event to get people to come over so they could share the passion of this one thing, and one person turned up, and he said it was just like really, really awkward. And I thought, dude, you are so missing out, all right? Like, we've had this community here for decades, and for us, it's just like, for you and me, it's like it's normal. And to not have that, I can't even begin to imagine if you wiped that 40 years out and said, no, the fan community did not exist. I mean, and you're right, you and I wouldn't know each other. Most of the people I know on this show I wouldn't know. And it's like, that's just like beyond my comprehension. And it's like, oh, dude, you have got no idea just how sad that is to hear. And that's in a big American city. So, as I said, it must be happening everywhere. So, unbelievable.
And I do remember being asked, because I've been on a few convention committees as well, and being asked at one point from someone, oh, so who's your guest of honor and stuff like that, and thinking, oh, actually, I don't know, but that's not why I go to the convention. It's socializing with my friends. It's meeting new friends, meeting people that have the same interests as me. It's not about, oh, I want to go and see this star and get their autograph. And that has affected some of what we do to an extent, because there are big things like Oz Comic Con that run now in Australia. So again, if people aren't familiar with what a fan-run convention is like, which you can probably talk a lot more about, Dags, having run the last couple of great fan conventions in Australia, it's not about the latest autograph.
No, I totally agree with you.
See.
Claire made a point about how it's like the shift of letter writing to meetings, the way we socialise is changing again. And you are right. Look, I mean, the social element is a different beast to how it once was. And it is different, and it has changed, but hasn't necessarily changed for the better, because one of the key things of having people meet face-to-face is they interact differently. And the idea that you can physically meet people, have friends, relationships, and all the rest of it. If you take that out, that's a huge aspect of human sort of like makeup that is just suddenly removed. And you can on a screen can only compensate for so much. I mean, there's one thing to say, oh, I've got 600,000 friends on Facebook, but I've never physically met any of them. It's like, well, what does that tell you? And if you did see them face to face, I mean, would you actually be classed as friends? Would they pass each other on the street and go, oh, mate, I'd love to be your buddy because we're just like two peas in a pod, whereas as opposed to just a friend on Facebook, which could mean nothing at all. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to share this story. I'll try to get through this pretty quickly. Now, this happened in the early 2000s. I have shared this on a show a couple of years ago, and I saw this firsthand, right? So this is in the year 2000, 2001, when the Star Wars forums were really, really starting to take off. And in the Victorian forum, there were all these people who were sort of signing up and joining up, and they're all like teenagers and school kids and whatever. And they obviously all got along really, really well, right? They're all talking to each other all the time. It was online, when that was a big thing on their computers. And myself and another guy spoke to these people and said, well, clearly you're a Star Wars fan because you're in a Star Wars fan community. Why don't you come along to a Star Wars fan club meeting, right? It seems the next logical step. Get away from the damn screen, come and see each other. And they after months of coaxing, they finally said, all right, we'll go, right? And 8 of them turned up, right? I remember it specifically. All 8 turned up. It was great. And they stood all next to each other, and you had nothing to say. Right. I remember looking at all 8 of them. It was like a lineup. They were embarrassed. They didn't know who anybody was. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? And I said, you guys all know each other. You've been speaking for over a year online. Now that you're all face to face, you should be wrapped to see each other. And they were like lost sheep. Right. And these are Star Wars fans in a Star Wars fan club meeting. They could have spoken to anybody. Right. And they had no idea what to do. And it was so sad to see that, because I thought, man, you've got this connection already. Why aren't you sort of taking it the next step further? And as it turned out, for the next meeting, only 5 of them turned up. Then it was down to 3. Then it was down to 1, and they all just bailed, right? And I just could not process that at all. And I thought, that is what a wasted opportunity. For them, the screen was their savior. And I get the whole thing of being introverted and not being able to sort of, you're a bit shy and whatever else. But these people already knew each other. Right. And that comes back to that whole thing of saying, if you've got Facebook friends, that's great. But would you be friends in real life? Right. If you met each other at a party, would you say, mate, we are connecting? Or is it all just some bullshit number on a screen? So, yeah, anyway, I couldn't believe that when I saw that. And I thought, mate, that's just so sad. That's my story.
Well, there has to, I think, too, of the MSFC. And I think there has to be a reason why the MSFC was successful for so long. We've struggled in the last few years, and I'll get into that in a little bit more depth as well. But, it was so active and so vibrant and involved with so many things, and all of the people that used to come to the MSFC meetings were involved with so many things, and that lasted for a good 30 years. You imagine it, every week on a Friday evening, lots of people, not just a small number of people, but lots of people turning up regularly. It's like, well, we could have all sat around at home. I don't know. Well, not back then because we didn't have the internet, but let's say we did have the internet. It's like, well, we could have done that, but it was so much nicer to get up and socialize and I don't know, just mess around like you do with any other friends of, you know, who's salting who's dim sims or whatever sneakily behind the table, and it's because it's not all just about let's sit down and talk about Star Trek or let's sit down and talk about Star Wars. It's a friendship group getting together. You know, there's a reason that you go down the pub for after work drinks with your friends and you don't all go home and then get online and have online drinks with your friends. And every week for years, that's a big thing. You were going to say, Dags?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I really want to bring up, and Aaron's just brought this up, an absolute classic, right? He's saying about how many pro-cons. Now, these are professional conventions, are huge and more accepted, yet fan club meetings are dwindling in numbers and becoming harder and harder to get people to. And because Alice and I were discussing this before we went on air, because Alison, as we said, is in charge of the MSFC, and it's been an ongoing trend for a number of years now. Fan club events have just plummeted. And I have actually discussed this with people, and I've said, you know, once upon a time, there used to be a stigma associated with a science fiction fan club meeting, you know, that the whole idea was going to be full of, you know, dorks and losers and all the rest of it. And that obviously wasn't always the case at all. But it is a common issue now to get people to turn up to an event, especially these days, because people are saying, well, I don't need to go to a fan club meeting when I can learn everything I want about this particular franchise from my computer at home, not realizing that going to a meeting isn't about learning what's happening in the franchise. It's all about meeting other people who have the same interests as you. So, but is there anything you want to comment on regarding that? Because that has impacted you directly, the lack of attendances at gigs.
Yes, so that's probably part of it. I don't think that there's any one thing that has meant the end. It's lots of little things along the way, and the way we socialize is part of it, and the acceptance of sci-fi into pop culture is part of it. To the extent I know that there's authors now that clearly they're writing what we would call science fiction or speculative fiction, but they just want to be known as, oh, I'm just a fiction writer, because it's so much more crossover between the genres now. I think cost is another thing. So at the MSFC, we were very fortunate to have a very cheap venue for a very long time, thanks to the people that set that up originally. And I know through my involvement with the university clubs, so harkening back to what I spoke about earlier, because I ran some of the clubs at university, we were basically allowed to use any of the university venues we wanted to for free under the name of the club at the university. And that got us access to some really good venues that I know we held quite a few events at over the years. That all dried up when the student union changed, and I think it dried up to an extent when I left and there wasn't somebody else to take over, although I know some of the clubs continued to use some of those venues because they were still very affordable. Now, even hiring a venue, they're hundreds of dollars. Instead of it being, you know, $50 for the night, you got hundreds of dollars for the afternoon. So you need the attendance to make that viable. So that really limits what activities you can do. And then you're left with, oh, okay, do we organise a cricket match in a park, or do we organise something else where we're going out, you know, an inter-club bowling competition? And that has been one of the really big struggles with the MSFC, because we have a huge library and it's a very unique library. There's a lot of rare and out of print books, and when the club was operating regularly, it was a focal point for members as well, not necessarily to sit in the library and read all night, but it gives you something else to chat about. And all right, we'll go to the kitchen, we'll grab a cup of tea, and then we'll sit around and we'll chat about stuff and in the comfort of the library. And when we left our venue at St David's Uniting Church in Moreland, the books went into storage, and it's been so challenging to find a venue that we can even afford to house that library, which is a shame. And I think it would be a bit of a focal point for bringing people back to the face-to-face meetings as well.
Totally agree with you.
Things.
Yeah, it's very funny. You should mention the cricket match and the beach days. Aaron has also mentioned, I'm not going to focus on the Goon Show thing, but the cricket match thing. Most people wouldn't even be aware that fan clubs actually had social events. And you are right, the Doctor Who Club, I mean, it's hard to even fathom this now, right? Back in the 80s and whatever else, had a cricket match, an annual cricket match. Some clubs had a beach day. You mentioned about the bowling days. Some clubs had bowling days, and sometimes there were inter-club bowling days where multiple clubs would get together and go 10-pin bowling, represent your club at a club gig. I don't know if people are even aware that in 2002, for Star Walking, we took 2 minibuses, drove to Sydney for an event up there and drove back on the Sunday night, right? And on top of that, of course, Austrek had a Halley's Comet trip back in 1986 off to a motel for a couple of nights to see Halley's Comet. None of those things happen today, right? So even if somebody said, I would love to organize this, there's just nothing out there. There's no community anymore, or you certainly can't do this online, to say, well, this is what I'd love to do. Effectively, you have to do it all on your own. And that is one massive facet of the whole social fabric that has just been removed and hasn't existed for like many years now. And I accept the fact that if you're a fan club operator like you are, and you said, I want to organize this particular event, and you're struggling to get numbers to attend, that, as I said earlier, I think has a lot to do with the age issue. But the fact that it's so difficult for these things to occur in the first place, and they, once upon a time, they did occur, that's just one part that is just completely missing. And people who are just joining living on the internet now would never know any of this stuff. And it's just like, oh, it's just so sad to see. So,
and I think commercialism and some of the so-called professional events have had an impact as well. I think of something like Oz Comic Con, and people have a certain expectation of how that's going to be structured, what they're going to be able to do, what they're going to be allowed to do while they're there. And you compare that with some of the events that we ran back in the day, and even movie nights. So we organised movie nights and previews. So before they were available to the general public, I know the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at the old what was the old Valhalla was one of those events. Basically booked out the cinemas, and we gave away towels to everyone that we got from the production company. Stuff like that doesn't happen anymore because the cinemas themselves have become such big business. You know, the Westgarth or the Valhalla was an independently owned cinema. You can do stuff like that when you can get hold of someone, but they're all owned by big chains now, and the fans can't get in. I tried a couple of times in more recent years. I mean, more than 10 years ago, but obviously more recently than the events that we ran. And they really just direct you to, oh, yeah, we'll go to our group booking thing. How many tickets do you want? And it's like, no, I want the whole cinema. And I know we did it with Star Wars movies. I'm sure Star Walking did it in Melbourne and Sydney, and we did it up in Brisbane when the new movies came out. We also did it with Mirror Mask and the Cinema Nova in Carlton. And, you know, great. Hey, you want to see a movie before anybody else is going to see it? Come and see it with our club.
So I just want to clarify something. So Claire made a point. Yes, I want to clarify. Yes, you can actually obviously meet people online and become friends with them. That's not a problem. That wasn't my concern. What I was suggesting that sometimes you can become friends with someone online, but if you were to meet them face to face, you go, you know what? We're not really connected at all. It's not the same interaction. But I mean, I guess where you lose in one area, you gain in another. If you're just doing it all face to face, clearly you're only limited by who you see standing in front of you. If you do it online, you can go international. Okay, I get that. 100% right. No dramas. Yay, team. Of the two, which would you prefer if you had to have one over the other? Now, in our instance, for both of us, you have a bit of both. We've got friends that we've met personally, people we've met online. But these days, with the community being the way it is, no one's meeting each other personally. It's all being met online. And that's my concern. It's all great. It's wonderful. You got all these people all over the world, but there's still names on a screen. And you go, you know what? I'd love to see what these people are like in person. And that's the bit that's actually sadly lacking. And that's the nature of how the world has changed. And whether it's changed for the better or the worse, it's entirely up to the individual. I think old people like ourselves, older people, would say it's not necessarily changed for the better, but where's it going to head? So 10 years from today, right, 2031, when Omicron is long gone and COVID is long gone and all the rest of it, does that mean, like, if there are no fan clubs at all, if all the communities have all shut down and online is the only place to go, does that mean it's like, yay, team, this is score 1 for online and score 0 for poor old face-to-face social interaction? That's, I don't know, that's the hard thing to sort of fathom. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it's an interesting argument because I think of other groups. My kids are off at Scouts tonight, and we had to do Scouts online for a year, and oh my Lord, was everybody so happy to go back to face, because you can't go camping online, you can't light campfires online, you can't do trails and tracks and all. That's very much an in-person and very often an outdoor activity. The same, I guess, for anyone who plays cricket or basketball or does dancing. Same thing. You wouldn't do them online. So it's interesting with fandom because it's a more genteel or passive pastime. Reading books and watching movies. You don't need to do face-to-face. Are we robbing ourselves because we are no longer doing them face-to-face?
No, it's a fair point. And I think it's unfortunate because, I mean, and this comes back to the age thing. I know we've brought it up a few times before, but there were a lot of people who were in the fan community who decided to leave. They were around for 30 years. They've said, I've had my time. It's just too hard, too difficult to actually physically drive somewhere, catch up with the people. It's not a big deal anymore. And I get that, right? They've had their turn because people used to leave all the time. You'd have people around, they'd all vanish. And you go, okay, they've obviously moved on. It's not an issue. But the concern is the fact that there's nobody new coming in, all the younger people coming in to take our place, as I said earlier, and they're not being introduced or exposed to that same sort of sensation that we once had. And that if they got the opportunity and were prepared to do it, that they could actually get a lot out of it. But it's not even happening at all. And that's, I think, the unfortunate thing. There's a whole stack of comments. I'm miles behind on the comments here, which is really quite interesting. And
you read the comments. I'll chat a bit more. Just to extend what you have said, it lacks the wow factor, and that's something that I find continually challenging when I'm trying to promote fan clubs or conventions to people and say, oh, you should come along, it's really awesome fun. And they start asking me things like, oh, who's the special guest going to be, and who's going to be there, and what do you do there? And then I'm trying to explain to them, it's not so much about what's the activity that's been organised, who's coming to do the guest talk. It's the atmosphere. It really is the social atmosphere. And to the extent that it doesn't matter what activity you're doing. You could be playing cricket, which is not typically a science fiction fanish thing, although I think that was a thing in the 80s because the Fifth Doctor played cricket. That's probably where it came from. But that's kind of a moot point. It's not about the cricket or the beach or whatever it is that you happen to be doing. It's that you're doing it together with people that you already have a camaraderie with because you already have that commonality.
Yeah. Good old Aaron's written War and Peace here, but in short, he was pretty much just saying that back in our day, when you're a science fiction fan, you're pretty much on the outcast as far as the normal world was concerned. Now it's all socially accepted. If you're a science fiction fan, you're suddenly the cool kid on the street. And maybe that has something to do with it and the fact that the world has changed. And that's, fair enough. I mean, like in the past 2 years, with the absence of social events that have occurred, I mean, are people, as you said, like kids wanting to go back to school and Scouts and whatever else, next year when everything all opens up again, will everybody just like, oh my God, I've been missing these things for so long, suddenly all turn up in droves? Or is the damage done? And people have said, you know what, I can just sit back now and just not worry about visiting anybody anymore. And because I know in Sydney, for example, when they lost their Star Trek fan club in the early 2000s, I mean, they never created another one to replace it. So, and there's a long story as to what happened there. So all the Star Trek fans in Sydney don't actually have a Star Trek fan club to go to. And it's been like that for nearly 20 years now. And I'm thinking, mate, how sad is that? So, oh dear. What do you reckon? I love this one from Colin. Yeah, I love going to fan club meetings is that girls would actually talk to you. Well, the good thing is you could actually talk to them because they're obviously there for the same reasons you are, to talk about movies, TV shows, and whatever else. So that was always a good thing. So, yeah. Hey, look, you and I became friends. So at some point, you and I had a conversation. So what do you reckon?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the conversation was or, the nature of it. And I certainly didn't discover room parties until the next convention. that room parties are a whole nother thing, but which are getting harder and harder to do these days at conventions.
I'll tell you one thing that I'll bring up. This is, I've been, as I said, I've been in the community for nearly 40 years and I've seen it a lot and done a lot, but there's only one event, one particular thing that occurred to me and I experienced back in 1995. And it was like, oh my God, this is just magnificent. And I'll go through it quickly. I was part of the Star Walking convention for Force One. and I was setting up a room full of all this AV gear, and the whole this enormous room, right? It was all by myself, and there was these 3 guys who were sitting there talking about Star Wars comics that they just bought, and I was just listening to their conversation. And I realized as I was listening that all 3 of them came from different states. It's like New South Wales, South Australia, Queensland, right? And they'd only just met, right? Now, this was on Good Friday, so the convention hadn't even started yet, right? We're all just too busy setting up. And as I watched them talk about what they bought, I realized right in front of me, friendships are already starting to form, right? Now, I have no idea who these 3 guys were, whatever happened to them or anything like that. But I thought the event hasn't started, and they're talking about the one thing that they all love, comics. And for all I know, back in wherever they came from, they had no one to talk to about this sort of stuff, and yet it was happening right in front of our eyes, or in front of my eyes. And I thought that was a really poignant moment to say, it's one thing to attend all these events, it's another thing to put on all these events so that people who attend them can get something special out of it. And that was something I found was very, very special. And I feel that probably wouldn't happen today to the same extreme, if at all. And I think that's the thing that society is lacking. So if people are comfortable living on the screens and living on the computers and the phones and whatever, and it's like, yeah, good luck to them, no dramas at all. But there's got to be an impact somewhere. There's got to be something that's lost from society, from family society anyway.
Similarly, certainly at Constantinople, I met people from Sydney and Perth and Brisbane and Adelaide and at other conventions. And that's what it ended up with me going over to SwanCon in Perth and checking out what SwanCons were. And as it turns out, for various reasons, I've lived in Brisbane and Sydney and Adelaide. But certainly there's always been people that I've known when I've rocked up, either to visit or actually to move there in some cases. There's always been at least a couple of people that I've known, and then you get to know more people through those people. And it goes both ways. There's a huge fanish community around the world, and I have gone to a couple of World Cons in other countries, and you meet up with your friends again, and then maybe you end up staying at their house. So when I went to Worldcon in Glasgow, I know that I stayed at a couple of fans' houses because that's what you do. You stay at your mate's place.
Yep, totally agree. Claire's brought up a good one. Safety is more of an issue now. It's easier to escape unwanted attention. And look, that's actually a fair point. It is a fair point. I mean, I know of 2 examples where in 2 different fan clubs where 2 women turned up, one at each, and they brought their friends with them because they didn't know what to expect, right? Because it was like the what do you call it? The not the co-pilot, club. the moral support, whatever.
Wingman.
I've heard. Sorry, the what?
Wingman.
Thank you. The wingman in this case was females. And in both occasions, they didn't know what to do. Right? They weren't sure they'll go along because they were uncertain as to what to expect. And as it turned out, one of them stayed with the club for a period of time, and this, funnily enough, was the MSFC, and the other one is still there, right? So is actually now will soon be the director of a particular fan club. So it's and that's a good point that Claire brought up. That if you're going long first time, you don't really know what to expect, and the first impressions. And I know I've discussed this with Aaron. Can be really quite daunting. If you walk in and there's hive of buzz of activity and you go, oh, this is grouse, I'm going to become a part of this. But if it's quiet or it's socially awkward, or you're thinking, shit, I'm the only female there and it's also all full of men, that can be a bit disconcerting as well. So I do agree with you, Claire, that the whole thing of staying behind the screen is definitely the safety net too, which is unfortunate. And in this day and age is definitely different to how it was 30, say, years ago. So fair
and
call.
It can be very daunting or off-putting if you turn up and you're the new person and everybody already knows everybody else. And you feel like you can't get to know anybody, or you're the odd one out. And that's certainly something that I have tried to be aware of as the president. And I see a new person there that I don't know, I'll go up and I'll introduce myself. And I will introduce people around the room. And it's like, okay, now at least you know everybody's names and you know that we're okay to approach and to talk to. And you're not sitting there thinking like, these people all know each other. I can't join the conversation.
Yep. So Aaron's made a point about the cosplaying groups, right? They're the only ones doing social activities. Not the only problem with that is you need to have a costume to be a part of the group. You can't just come in from the outside, right? So that's the big primary. All of them, they all have the same issue, except maybe Gavin's group in Sydney, right? No costume, no entry. Simple as that. Full stop. There's no ands, ifs, or buts, right? Whereas in a fan club environment, you can be anybody, All right, you just walk in, be a part of the show, no dramas. So that's the downside. The cosplay groups do have a huge element of elitism. That's whatever word I'm trying to say. And that's the downside. So if I want to go to a 5.0 first party, I can't go because I don't have a costume. So that's not an apples for apples comparison. So, and for that reason, they'll just focus on their own things. So, very, very interesting. So now, apparently you've got to buzz off in a minute. Is that right? You got to pick up some kids.
Yeah.
Is that right? Now, do you need to say farewell and ta-das and all the rest of it?
Well, I'll just say farewell and ta-da, and thank you very much for having me. I'm sure we could talk for hours about all the crazy stuff we got up to over the last 30 or 40 years in fan clubs. But
yeah, well, all I can say, if it wasn't
away.
for that whole fan club community thing, I wouldn't have known you, and you've been a great friend. We've been hanging out for like 20-something years now, so, and you're on the show tonight. So there you go. Face-to-face is the way to go. What do you reckon?
Thank you, Dags. Yes.
No,
well, I turned 50 in a couple of years, so I said, good, we're out of COVID, but I'll have to have at least one practice party before I have the big 5-0.
Yeah. Well, if it helps at all, just and now I'm going to stay online so people don't have to leave the show. Last year, when the lockdown was over, I had a party here. 15 people were allowed to come along, and 15 turned up, and it ran for 14 hours. And that's what you people were keen on about the whole social get together. You know, get that as a fan club meeting. That's what you want. Couldn't do that online. What do you reckon? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
I'm gonna kick you off. Okay then. All right. See you soon. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Everybody say bye, Alison. Okay. Bye. All right. I feel like now I'm on my own. Now, how scary is this? I'm just going to go through some of the comments that people wrote just so I can finish that off. So you're going to have to bear with me while I read this because nobody else is talking. So how good is that? Godzilla's, yeah, exactly right. Sorry. Okay, Thomas, I'm not even reading this properly. I agree that social not face of going back to a good run next month. Well, that's exactly right. I mean, hopefully that people will sort of get together socially, and you just can't beat it. I mean, face to face is just the way to go if the opportunity presents itself. And to be fair, I mean, there are some people who can't do that. They live in different states. They're working. I mean, you get that. I mean, some people just live in different countries, for example. If you can't do it, you can't do it. But when you can do it and you choose not to do it, well, I guess that's a different thing. And that's the thing I think the younger people are seriously missing out on. So, teach guitar. Sorry, I have to read all this stuff now. Oh, here we go. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so Justin's joined us from Denmark. Oh, we are going absolutely international. So how good is this? So Justin used to be a part of the fandom back in the 1980s and onwards. So my question to Justin would be, are you still there, a part of it, or have you since left? Or has the community itself just crumbled and died? Because that sometimes can happen too, where you're a part of a community, but the community itself stops. And as I mentioned earlier, like in Sydney, where the Star Trek fan club closed in the early 2000s, it was a fan-run club. It became the official club. The official club closed, and the fan-run club didn't come back. And as a result, hasn't been a Star Trek fan club, Asterix it was, for 20-something years, which is very, very sad. So, or did you just move on? And as was said earlier, some people do just that. They say, I've been a part of it. It's been a great part of my life, but I've just moved on. And that's as far as it's gone, which is fair enough. There's nothing wrong with that at all. People do sort of move on with their lives. So that's not the issue. The issue is the fact that the younger people aren't coming in to experience the same joys that we once had. So there you go. So Gavin has met me through Skyforce. That's in Sydney, Skyforce. And so, yeah, that's kind of funny because Gavin remembers me. I don't really sort of remember him because back then it was a crazy world, but that was in the mid-90s. So, yeah, I like this one. Yeah, from Gavin. Yeah, go the old farts. Yeah, exactly right. Okay, so this is back from Justin again, saying we made friends across borders in Nordic countries immediately from when we went in airplanes, trains on the way to some. So that's fantastic. See, and isn't that a great? They're the kind of experiences that unfortunately may never happen again, in this modern day and age. But the fact that you were there to experience them is such a great thing. And I've actually said this to friends of mine who've lamented about the fact that the whole fan community has changed so much. I say, well, at least we were there when it happened, because I do know of people who joined afterwards, and that was their one regret. They joined too late. They missed out on all these things that had occurred. So all these fan club meetings and all these parties and all this stuff where everybody got together and all these friendships were formed and all these relationships. And they came afterwards and they missed it all. And that's actually the really unfortunate thing about it. So, yeah. Where are we? Organize really. Walk the room. See, you're all right, Aaron. Yes, and that is a key thing. So if you're talking about a fan club get-together, and you do get people who turn up for the very first time, they do have to be welcomed into the fold. And I always used to say, getting someone to their first fan club meeting is relatively easy. Getting them to their second one is the hardest part, right? Because if they come back the second time, you've pretty much got them. And remembering that every single person who ever attended a fan club meeting at any point, at one point rather, it was their first time, and they all chose to come back. Because I remember, it's like for myself, my first fan club get together was in January 1985. It was for Austrek. It was in a small, the Church Hall, St. Luke's in South Melbourne. We're just sitting in a circle. And I thought they're just talking about what they're going to do for the year. And even that was enough for me to say, you know what, I'm going to come back. And of course, here we are like 4 decades later. So, it is important to welcome people into an event, but they've also got to want to return. And some do and some don't. And that's the unfortunate thing about it. But if they do come back, at least you know that there was enough interest there for them to say, yes, I'm prepared to return and give it another crack. But having said that, and as we've discussed earlier, you can sometimes have a fan club meeting or a social event that is disappointing. The numbers are down. The type of people who've turned up aren't normally the people you'd associate with, and you can have a bit of a bad experience and you go, you know what, it's not working for me. I'm out the door and see you later, sunshine, which is very unfortunate, but it does happen. But I do agree with what Claire said earlier about the way the current world is, and it has changed things a lot. Where back in our day, just turning up to an event cold, it was like a new experience. It was a new challenge. Oh, what am I going to have? What's it going to be like when I turn up here? Whereas now people are a bit more sort of concerned about where they go to for their events. So, which is possibly why some of the large pop culture expos are so popular, because the numbers are so vast. Even if you think, well, there's nobody I want to talk to, but it's a safe environment to be a part of. So. There you go. Good old Lewis has joined us from good old the UK. So I got someone from the UK and someone from Denmark. And sorry, Lewis, I did have Alison Barton on the show with me earlier, but she's had to leave to pick up her kids, believe it or not. So I'm just running solo until I get to the end of the messages, and then I'll probably finish the show. But yeah, exactly right. It's kidding up. Yeah, exactly right. Great topic. Thanks. No worries. Okay, so I'm miles behind on the messages, so I got to try and read as I go as fast as I can. Yeah, do you want to go solo? Do you want a hand? Yeah, very, very good. That's a good point. The Lego people do online sort of. Yeah, right. And that's actually one social community that's doing really, really well. That's a very, very good point. Actually, the Lego group seems to be like massive and doing well for itself, and good on them too. So, if you could do a bit of a root cause analysis to say, well, why are they so successful and the science fiction fan community isn't? It's hard to say. I mean, to be fair, the Lego fan community isn't as old. We're talking about like maybe 10 years prior to the Brickventions taking place. There was no Lego community, really, no Lego fandom in this country, at least. So maybe because it is a relatively new thing. And of course, they've got the creative thing that goes with it, with the building the bricks and building bits and pieces and everything else. So then maybe that also helps. And maybe it's the demographic as well, because to be fair, I mean, some fan club events would attract a certain demographic, whether it was all male, all female, a mixture of both. Ideally, you wanted a mixture of both, because if it was too much of one, that would be off-putting to the other. And unfortunately, that did actually happen for some events. So, it's the kind of thing you think, well, if our demographic is young men, then sure, we'll appeal to young men, but you're cutting out 50% effectively of what could be another group. So, which is what you don't want, but yeah, it's hard to say. So, I'm going back to, I haven't even read this yet. Back in those days, we wrote real letters and sent fanzines and envelopes and so. Yeah, well, that's a whole different thing. Writing letters and fanzines, and the whole fanzine industry has pretty much died out these days. People still write stories. That hasn't changed, but the physical production of actual books, that is a dead sort of entity now. There would be very, very few left in the world. And I wouldn't be surprised if you said to a younger person today, someone who's only like 20 years old, oh, have you ever read any fanzines? They wouldn't have a damn clue as to what you're talking about. So that is a whole other thing altogether. Because when we were younger, obviously, the passion in doing these things was a lot greater. And like Aaron and myself have discussed about the fact that if you were a newsletter editor, getting a newsletter out on time was considered the most important thing in the entire planet. If a newsletter was one day late, it was like, oh my God, it's a crisis. Whereas today, people couldn't give a rat's ass about newsletters. So it's all about priorities, really. And it's funny how the world changes. So now, these days, if you haven't watched that new movie trailer in the first 10 minutes after it's come out, I was like, oh my God, what's wrong with you? So There you go. Here we go. So Chrissy's daughter came up to me with a star walking meeting and was shocked by how me, greet me by my name and demanding how I've been for several years. Oh, okay. Yes, I remember that actually because yes, you hadn't been around for such a long time, and then you turned up and greeted you by name. I assume that's a good thing. And demanding where I was. I mean, I hope the demanding wasn't like pointing fingers, going, "Where the hell have you been?" Nothing as bad as that. But yeah, I'd missed you. Yeah, I mean that's the thing when you sort of have familiar faces at an event and suddenly they're not there for a long period of time, then they reappear. You sort of want to know what's happening. What's happened to them, and hopefully they're back to stay. And the fact that you're on the show tonight means that I've done something right. So that's actually really, really good. So very, very good. So James has said his children went everywhere with him. It remained more online than social, and that's the thing. It's the generation today, and that's the whole crux of our discussion now. We, as in all the older people like myself, who are watching this now can say, well, this is how the fan community was for all those decades, and it was decades. But in the previous past 15 years, it's all changed. Everything's moving in a different direction. All right. There's no switch. There's no button that just press and resets it all. It's just how it is. And the question that we're all sort of asking was, is that a good thing? Is it good for society? Is it good for human interaction? Is it good for the development of younger people? And there's going to be a lot of psychological studies to discuss this, to say, well, human beings not interacting with other human beings, is that a bad thing? And the answer is probably yes. Because anybody who was aware of how fandom operated, it was always a safe community to be a part of. Okay, so one of the things about science fiction fans, and I discussed this in an episode months ago or weeks ago, is that we're all responsible citizens. There was hardly any alcohol drinking, nobody smoked, and there were very, very safe places to be a part of. And if younger people are not experiencing that, then to a large degree, they're actually missing a bit of their natural growth. That's how I sort of see it anyway. So I'm not a parent, so other people can sort of cover that one off, and whether they think so or not. But either way, that's how it is today. And yeah, it's actually quite sad. So yeah, and you're right, Grant. As we've said, yeah, a lot of people with their heads in their phones, and it's just the fact you don't get to experience it the way that we did, and the fact, plus also that if you say yes, there's this event on, there's this thing going on here, and people just choose not to go for no reason, just don't want to go and don't want to mix with the the nerds, as it were. That's actually very, very sad. So, but it is what it is, and yeah, there's not much what we can do about it. So back with Justin in Denmark. I can't believe we've got someone from Denmark. That's just spinning me out. Not a fan anymore. Tend to kind of, yeah, that's right. And a lot of people did move on, and that's fair enough. As I said earlier, I mean, you sort of just grow out of it. I mean, I stuck around because I had nowhere else to go. I thought, why would I leave? I mean, my whole life is invested in this, and throughout the entire 1990s, every single person I knew was within the fan community. I had no friends from anywhere else. I mean, typically you get people who say, well, I attend croquet club on a Wednesday and I go to the sewing circle on the Friday and I'm a part of this other group on the Saturday. It was just part of me. Fandom was just it. There was nothing else. And even as of today, that's it. There's nothing else. And so I never left. So I sort of stuck around because I had nowhere else to go. Whereas plenty of people move on. And that's, as we've said earlier, that's completely understandable. So very good, Aaron. Lego groups are good at building social networks. Good joke. I absolutely love it. I'm trying to finish this show off, but there's all these comments keep coming through. So yeah, a Sci-Fi Zone live catch-up. Well, funny enough, Sci-Fi Zone, what you're watching right now was never meant to be this way. When Sci-Fi Zone was first announced in 2017, it was actually going to be a social get-together group. That was part of its original plan. I wanted to actually create a group that was going to be run like a convention with panels and discussions, but only go for 4 hours. That was the original plan. And I was really confident that it was going to work great. It was going to be a lot of fun. And once again, push the whole physical interactivity with people together. But as a mate of mine said to me, and we sort of agreed, if it was 20 years ago in the 1990s, it would have been this massive success, right? But in 2018, it would have just died in the ass because it needed a minimum of 40 people per event to be classed as a success. And there was no guarantee that that was going to happen. And as Alison said earlier when she was on the show about getting venues and paying for them and all the rest of it, would need that to work. If only 5 or 6 people turned up, it would just die in the ass. And I would have been shattered, absolutely heartbroken. So that's the reason why Sci-Fi Zone as a social event stopped occurring. It didn't even get past the planning stage. ended up being an online show instead, which is where we are today. So there you go. It's very unfortunate. So because I've always been a social person, anybody who knows me knows that it's all about meeting people face to face. I mean, that I can't even stand phone calls. I hate phone calls, but give me someone standing in front of me, mate. The world is good. So talking nerdy, mate, you can't beat it. What can I say? Only when you're talking to someone in front of you. So how good is that? Very good. So even the Viola said normally watch this to cheer me up. It's changed by Fandom's changed. Well, that's right. And as I said earlier, the key thing is to embrace what was. If it's past and it's not coming back, at least we can say we've got the memories, we've got the experiences, sometimes the photos, maybe the videos, and that's enough to say, it was, but at least we were there. We didn't miss it. And the thing I find funny is that whenever social events were on, people would say, no, I'm not going, I can't be bothered, I've got other things to do, I've just lost interest in it. And mate, you can't think that way, because one day these events won't be here anymore, and then you're going to be looking at something to go to, and they just won't be around because you missed the boat. So that's why I always went to everything. So very, very cool. Yes, we are the old guard now, from a time past that a lot of people don't even know anything about. So yeah, I agree with you, Claire. You got to move with the times, and that's fair enough. But I still stand on my argument that, and of course, I'm an old breed. I freely acknowledge that. If the world is now going to interact through technology and technology only, good luck to them, and it's great, and it's fantastic. And if your words on a screen are your thing, then good for you. But it's yeah, I don't think it would be for everybody. And I still stand, regardless, I still stand on that argument that if you're a younger person, at some point you need to meet somebody else face to face and have a chat to them about things. And if you choose not to do that, you just do it all on a screen. And there was a comment on the screen earlier that I didn't put it up, but I did read it as saying how people just, even they're standing right next to each other, would be talking on a telephone. And yeah, it's just a sad part of life. But anyway, it's not my problem. In the end, it's not my problem. So there you go. You are right, Lewis. Yes, we are going international. It's just complete. And I'm not even supposed to be here by myself. I'm supposed to finish this show 10 minutes ago. Alison was with me. She's left to pick up her kids. And I was going to finish it all off, but the comments keep coming through. And I thought at least I didn't want people to feel like I just abandoned them and just left them. So hence the reason why I'm still crapping on. So there you go. Yeah. So Chrissy said about Star Walking was like that in the 90s. So for those who don't know, so Star Walking is the local Star Wars fan club, still going. And we created Skyforce in 1994, which was the social fan club meetings for Star Walking. And they were the only social fan clubs in the world for Star Wars. Can you believe it? And because I was in charge of Skyforce, and I remember when everybody turned up for the very first time, including Christy and all these other people, nobody knew anybody. They were all first-time attendees. And before long, as the meetings progressed, people got to know each other, friendships got to form, relationships got to form. We even actually had situations where couples met and got married and had kids because of our fan club, right? So, to a large degree, I'm almost responsible for their kids being born. But I remember it really, really well, and was like, this is a fantastic union of new fans, people turning up. They're all here for exactly the same reason. They love Star Wars. And of course, this was before the special editions in 97. So, and then of course, if everybody's there for exactly the same reason, you can talk to anybody. You can go to any single person and say, what did you think of this movie? What did you think of this character? And no one is going to look down upon you. No one's going to belittle you. No one's going to think you're a bit of a knob. You're actually all there sharing the same experience. And that is the one thing that you cannot get. I don't care how many words you write on a screen. You cannot get that in an online environment. It just physically isn't possible because it's just words on a screen. And even though it's all open to interpretation and who writes what and who reads what, you're still sitting there by yourself, right, with no one to physically talk to. You're just sitting there typing as fast as you physically can, whether it be on your phone or your keyboard, and it's just not the same. And that, I think, is the key crux of the entire thing. So, yes. So I know, Claire, okay, that's why I miss so much. Most of us have other social interactions, and that's exactly right. I have nowhere else to go. So for me, Fandom is it, and Aaron's store, because I work there on the Saturdays. So there you go. Oh my goodness gracious me, we're still going. Spreading one. Oh yeah, I totally agree with you, Thomas. Yeah, and I said this earlier in the show. For people who physically can't attend events, absolutely, I get it, right? And that happened a lot. People used to work on Saturdays, lived in different states, different countries. I mean, we've got two people here. I assume they're still around. Justin from Denmark and Lewis from the UK. Clearly, they're not going to be able to turn up to any events here. get that, completely understand. So it was more about the people who could go and chose not to, or today where they're not going no matter what. So you could have an event happening right next door, choose not to go. Anyway, so there you go. Anyway, yes, that's why we keep. I don't know why, because I'm still just rabbiting on here. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? So it's true, actually. In this case, and I actually met the girl when she was like 6 or 7 years old, and I was at a party one time, and we stood in the doorway, and I actually looked at her straight in the eye and said, it's because of me that you exist, right? And of course she said, no, it's not because of mum and dad. And I said, but your mum and dad actually met at a Skyforce meeting that I was running at the time. So if that meeting didn't happen, they wouldn't have met. You wouldn't be here. And you could just see the wheels ticking in her head, click, 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 click. Anyway, when she turned 21, she still remembered that story. So how good is that? So, oh my goodness gracious me. Preach it off. I'm trying to stop talking. That's what I'm trying to do here. So there's a good question. William has said, went to the Doctor Who Christmas party in 1984 and was met by the president, who is still a friend. And that is grouse, isn't it? When you go and meet people and you become lifelong friends. And a lot of all my friends, every single one, I met face-to-face at an event, right? Including Claire, who's on the show, and the Vile and all these other people. I met them face-to-face, and that's where the friendships formed. And I'm immensely proud of that. So, including Christy, who's with us at the moment. So, that's a good point, Claire. A fangled thing called video chatting, but video conferencing is, I think, given the option, people prefer phone calls and video conferencing because there's always this focus of got to look at the screen, got to look at the camera all the time, and someone always has to talk. Once you have an awkward silence, it's just not really the same. But I agree, it's the next step in the right direction. And if you do have people who physically can't go to places, that has helped. Ironically, and a lot of people would say this, that, and I know Claire knows this, that even like with the fan clubs who've tried to do Zoom calls over the past 2 years, despite the fact that you may actually have 1,000 people or 2,000 people on your club group chat on Facebook, you'll only get 20 people turning up to a Zoom meeting. And it's like, why is that? So the other 1,960, you just said, no, I'm just not interested. It's still not everybody's cup of tea. You would think that there would be a huge uptake of people saying, well, I can't physically be there, so I'll join into a Zoom conversation for a meeting. And more than one occasion, I've seen it firsthand, where you're thinking, well, okay, why isn't there like 10,000 people here? Because the group has 10,000 or 5,000 or 1,000, and it just hasn't worked out that way. So even that, where you don't even have to leave your house, you don't have to leave your chair or your armchair, you can just like dial in. People still aren't even doing that. Well, I can't figure that one out. So unbelievable. Where are we? Yeah, Daniel made a mention about the fact that New Year's Eve, he's dropping a hint, having a New Year's Eve party at my place. So yeah, exactly right. And recently, a group of independent fan made a very good con here in Denmark. Restaurant Outsiders apparently we've been going for some time. Yeah, well, conventions are sort of a thing of their own, and that is where a lot of people obviously congregate together. And if they're fan-run conventions, they generally have a different environment, a different look and feel to, say, your big professional events. And we've done an episode about conventions about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So, but if you're right, in a fan-run event that runs for 2 or 3 days, usually 3 days, and people just go to the event, stay there for the 3 days. So they're staying at the venue. They're not leaving. They don't physically go anywhere, right? They just stay there. You do create a sense of community just in the 3 days. And I've experienced this plenty of times. And I know some of the other people watching this show have done that as well. And it's just something you cannot replicate anywhere. You go to a convention, whether it's in your local city or in another city, you turn up, you don't go anywhere. You got the daytime events, you got the nighttime events, you got the room parties in the evening, and then it's repeat the next day, then it's repeat the day after that. And by the end of it, you've got this massive feeling of like, oh my God, this is my family. And for a lot of people who would remember this, you'd get con books, and at the back of the con book would be the section of autographs. And that is for other people to write in their phone numbers and, or these days, email addresses to say, contact me again, because now that we're going our separate ways, we want to maintain this friendship that has been created at that event. And I've actually had girlfriends that I've met at conventions, and they've put their phone numbers in on my book, and sure enough, we've had a relationship not that long after, and that is just sadly lacking from today. So I know exactly where you're coming from, Justin. Yeah, exactly right. I agree with you, William. I've got time to wrap it up, yeah, because I'm just rabbiting on now. So very, very cool. And yeah, otherwise I'll never stop yapping on. So there you go. Justin, I appreciate all your comments from Denmark. It's absolutely fantastic. And you were part of Fandom back in the day, and good for you, sir. And I certainly can't say anything I think everything's great regarding that. So what the future of fandom holds is anybody's guess, and I guess we'll just have to wait and sort of see how it all plows along. But at least for a lot of people watching the show, you're all a part of it. I was a part of it, and regardless as to what happens tomorrow or the next 10 years or the next 20 years, at least we're all there, and we could say it was all great. So let's wait for the next convention or the next party, and yay team. So very, very cool. All right, I'm going to buzz off now. I had Alison on earlier. She's long since picked up the kids, probably even got back home again now. She could easily rejoin us. Leave you all to it, and we'll see you all next week. So bye for now. Okay, make sure you stay. If you're going to go meet people, make sure you do it in the zone. Yay team. Bye for now.